Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar on Georgia O'Keeffe. My name is Melanie Blake, and I'm the Director of Classical Pursuits. I'm here with Samantha Clark, Marketing Manager at Worldwide Quest, and of course with Wendy O'Brien, who many of you know now. Wendy is a long classical pursuits leader, a philosopher, a lover of art and nature, a workshop leader at the Art Gallery of Ontario, among many other things. And we're very happy to have her come back for the second part of her Armchair Art Tours Nature series. I'll turn it over to Wendy in just a moment. Just to very briefly review the features of GoToWebinar, because I know that many of you know them by now. To adjust your audio settings, you're going to either click on the word audio, or it might be an icon of an earphone or a megaphone, depending on your interface. And you can click on that, adjust your volume. If you are having technical problems with audio or anything else, you can put that in the questions section. So click on the word questions, or again, it might be a question mark icon. The field will open up, and type in your question or your problem, and we will help you as quickly as we can. Of course, Wendy will be taking questions after the presentation. So throughout, please feel free to send in a question about anything you'd like to know more about, and I'll be back later for the Q&A to facilitate that with Wendy. Sorry, just lost my train of thought. So as many of you know, we have a lot of things happening at Classical Pursuits, so many things that I can't keep them all straight sometimes. And so we have several webinars still coming up throughout the summer. Wendy finishes up her series next week by talking about the British Columbia temperate rainforest and Emily Carr. We are taking a week off after that because I'm going to LA. And then we'll be back with a literary quiz, which is going to be a lot of fun. And I'll have more details up on the Classical Pursuits website shortly. So start thinking about getting a team together for the quiz. We also have several smaller group and more interactive seminars, as many of you know already. We're going to be announcing quite a few more this week, including a couple new ones with Wendy. We have a seminar with Sean Forrester, whom you may remember from our first Armchair Art Tour series, a new webinar on Virginia Woolf. And we still have several places in the late July and August webinars. Oh, sorry, I keep saying webinar, seminar. So if you do have any questions, please visit the Classical Pursuits website, give me a call, send an email. Happy to tell you anything you need to know. And thanks very much to everyone who's been participating in our seminars. It really keeps us going. We're so grateful, and we're having a lot of fun with them. That's it from me. I will turn it over to Wendy to talk about Georgia O'Keeffe and the fantastic, amazing New Mexico countryside. See you back for the Q&A. Bye, Wendy.
Thanks. And hello, everybody, and welcome back. Some of you were with us last week when we went on our first kind of art tour nature walk. We headed north last week to this place. This is Algonquin Park, with the help of the amazing paintings of the Canadian painter Tom Thompson. This week we're heading in a bit of a different direction. This week what we're doing is we're headed south. We're headed to Ghost Ranch near Abiquiu in New Mexico. We're headed here. Well, I got to tell you, I wish we could actually be there, but unfortunately, until it's safe and until we can, we've got, well, other alternatives. And I have to tell you, just before I came online, I checked the weather in Abiquiu today, and it was like 37 degrees. So, you know, perhaps we're okay not being there right at this particular moment. And again, until it's safe. What we can do, however, is we can use these amazing paintings, the paintings of Georgia O'Keeffe, and do some armchair traveling. You know, it's such a wonderful thing to have works like this one. This is her Black Mesa landscape that allow us, if not to travel in person, It allows us to travel on and through the canvas in our imagination. And, you know, I have to say, and I mentioned this last week in our first tour like this, that, you know, while it's wonderful that we can travel with the paintings, while we can't be in the place, I think the paintings themselves change how we see when we actually have a chance to get to New Mexico, to this amazing spot with, I mean, this photograph, just stunning. I think what the paintings allow us to do is they draw our attention to the landscape in a particular kind of way. We learn to pay attention through the paintings, to look closely. And that shapes when we actually have a chance to travel once again, when the world opens up once more. It allows us to focus on the details. It allows us to make sure that we don't miss the best part. So we're headed to the United States, and we're headed right here to New Mexico. And we're gonna head towards this area up here, Rio Arbor. Right up in sort of this area is where Ghost Ranch is found. I'll show you a little bit closer. There we are. There's Ghost Ranch, and you can see it in relationship to Santa Fe and Taos. We're headed here, and I love this this map, because it gives you a sense not only of where we are in New Mexico, but of some of the geographical elements. You see the rivers, you see the mountains, you see the trees. This is where we're off to this place. It's so stunningly beautiful, isn't it? Just the layers on layers. I think I mentioned a previous talk that one of the things I'm really missing is vistas, is, you know, open space and the ability to see far away as we spend time in our homes, on our streets, and in our neighborhoods. We're gonna head here with, there she is, with Georgia O'Keeffe. Well, I have to tell you right from the start, when I said I was going to do Georgia O'Keeffe, people think that I'm going to talk about flowers. They think I'm going to talk about flowers, and more specifically and more worrisome, I think, they think I'm going to talk about her flowers, and they think I'm going to talk about sex. And I got to tell you from the start, I think that there's a lot of press and a lot of time been spent on sexuality and sexual imagery in Georgia O'Keeffe's works, particularly in her flower images. I think that helps to sell to a particular audience. But Georgia herself said this. She said, when people read erotic symbols into my paintings, they're really thinking about their own affairs. When she painted flowers, she said, I paint flowers. That's it. That's all. That's everything. I paint flowers and flowers and flowers. And if you see anything else, it's not what I had intended. It's what's in your own mind. And so she actually, at one point in time, she would tell folks who came to interview her, if you ask me questions about sex and sexuality in relationship to my work, the interview is over on the spot. And she banned some critics from attending the openings of her shows if they had written in kind of a psychoanalytic Freudian way about her works. Yeah, there's so much time and attention spent on the flowers, and don't get me wrong, they are stunningly beautiful. But I think it's caused us to kind of overlook some of the other elements or aspects of her work, including, well, for our purposes today, her incredible lifelong study of landscapes. Now, to begin with, I have to tell you, flowers, I know. I have to tell you that I myself have a very long background in history with Georgia O'Keeffe. The Oriental poppy painting that you see in front of you right now. Well, when I first went to university, I think I was 19 years old, and I knew nothing about art. I knew nothing about anything. I didn't know anything about life. I went to a poster show, a poster sale that they held in the university I was at. And I bought a copy of Oriental Poppies, and it was on my wall for a very long time. And I have to tell you, across from me, if you could see where I am, up in my attic at the moment, where it feels a little bit like New Mexico weather at the moment. I have on the wall behind my screen, I still have a copy of Oriental Poppies there. Yeah, there was something about her work that spoke to me even before I knew she was speaking to me. And when I saw this particular photograph of her as a young woman, I was even more drawn in and interested in what she was doing. It was, I think, the intelligence that I see on her face. And I love that she's sitting there on the ground with her watercolors painting what was in front of her. Yeah, there was something about her that, well, Georgia's been on my mind in honor of Ray Charles for a very long time. And I do feel in many ways that I have an almost intimate kind of relationship with her and her works, which is, I know, a bit crazy to say in some regards, but many of you, I'm sure, have those artists that, you know, lived in another time in another place, but somehow they captivate your imagination and they intrigue you in ways, they force you to keep looking and to keep trying to find something more. And I really have that with Georgia O'Keeffe, probably more so than any of the other artists that we'll take a look at in these series. Yeah, there's something about her work that's gotten under my skin and in my head, and much of my interest in her work and much of the kind of questions that preoccupy me at the moment about what she's doing, relates back to this photograph. This was a photo, I think this was one of the ones that was taken by Ansel Adams when he visited O'Keeffe in her home. And I spent a lot of time, I gotta say, with this photo over the last few weeks as I was getting ready to talk with you about O'Keeffe today and landscape painting. You know, I spent a lot of time thinking about, you know, what is she looking at? You know, what's she looking at? What does she see when she looks out there? You know, what is she looking for? And what does she translate from what she sees out there onto the canvas for us? Those questions, you know, they preoccupy me. What was she looking for in the landscape? And well, I'm going to spend more time a little bit later this summer thinking about many artists raising this question. You know, yeah, I know she sees the mountains and the brush and the desert, but what does all that mean for her? I guess there's a quote from O'Keeffe that really kind of frames my question and our look at her landscapes today. She said at one point in time, she said, "Where I was born and where and how I live is unimportant. It's what I've done with where I've been that should be of interest." And that's sort of what I hope you'll join me as we walk through and around Ghost Ranch. I hope you'll join me in trying to pick up that question of, you know, what it is that she's done with where she's been. What about that should interest us? We're off on an adventure here with O'Keeffe to try to figure out what she put on the canvas, what was in the canvas, and what was behind the canvas, and in particular in her landscapes. I haven't seen this on a big screen in a while, and look at this joyous thing. Many people don't know that O'Keeffe was painting landscapes very early on in her career. She always had a kind of interest in landscape form. Now, let's get it clear. She did start by making works that look like this one. I apologize for the grainy quality of this image, but it's very difficult to find copies of it. This work is called Dead Rabbit and Copper Pot, a work that she created when she was at the New York Art Student League, and for which she won a very prestigious award, the Chase Award for. I have it up here because I did want to make clear that, well, O'Keeffe was classically trained as an artist. She was born in Wisconsin in 1887, but then she would move to Chicago to study at the Chicago Art Institute and later on at the Art Student League, where you see she created this image. While she was there, she spent time thinking about the ideas of Arthur Wesley Dow. And it's an important moment, and I apologize for geeking out for a bit, but Dow's influence on her and what would become her kind of way of approaching, especially, I think, landscape, can't be underestimated. Dow was really an advocate of putting aside tradition, putting aside kind of representative or mimetic forms of art, of trying to show what the world looked like just as it was, for treating the canvas as if it was a mirror to show us the way the world looked, complete with the good, the bad, and the ugly. That was an older kind of style of art. And well, Dow, what do you, I'm sorry, yeah, Dow, what he wanted to do is he wanted to advance a much more kind of personal style, a personal interpretation of events. And I have to say that I think that it was very much that when O'Keeffe left New York, she had to leave New York and the students leave because she just didn't have enough money to be able to continue her studies there. But she left there and she would travel around America. She would end up in Virginia for a period of time. She would go to Texas and finally to South Carolina. And as she traveled those very distinct kind of landscapes with this idea of creating a very personal interpretation of what she saw, well, things changed. She said that what she decided was to start anew, to strip away everything that she had been taught. And what resulted were images that looked like this. Now, again, because we focus so much on the flowers, oftentimes we overlook some of the other elements and aspects of O'Keeffe's work, including the fact that she did these amazing watercolors early on in her career. I mean, this is such a beautiful kind of landscape called Light Coming in the Plains #2 from 1917. These watercolors were kind of stunning, and in it she's embracing the idea of landscape. But again, remember what I told you about Dow, giving her own interpretation of it, using her own, trying to discover her own style. And for her, that meant to turn towards abstraction, towards images like the one that you see on your screen right now. She said that she found that she could say things with color and shapes that she couldn't say any other way, things she had no words for. And so you take this idea of the landscape, you use watercolors as your medium, you move towards abstraction, and are you ready? You get pictures that look like this. This is Morning Sky, Texas from 1916 that she created. And it was unlike anything she had painted before. It was unlike, well, I have to say, anything that people had seen before. And she knew that. And I have a feeling that as difficult as it was, she also accepted that this was her role as a painter. Where do I get that idea from? Well, she said this. She said, to create one's world in any of the arts takes courage. And she found that courage, working away from Chicago, working away from more traditional schools of painting with watercolors because they were cheap and she couldn't afford oils. And with these incredible landscapes around her, she would paint, like nobody had painted before. I have to say, I don't think nearly enough time and energy has been spent taking a look at O'Keeffe's gorgeous watercolors, her works from this early period. If you have a chance, I highly recommend to go online, follow and look at these works because they're so novel. And as she was trying to, live up to Dow's idea, they're so original, like her courage to paint what she saw, how she saw it. Now, right from the start, it's kind of astonishing. Eventually, she would lose the color, she would lose the watercolor, and she would do a series of charcoal drawings like this and this and this. And some of you may know that these were the drawings that Anita Poulter would send to this guy. This is Alfred Stieglitz. And well, Stieglitz would say that he knew that there was something new and something exciting by any artist who painted like this. And he would encourage O'Keeffe to join him in New York City, where he wanted to introduce her into the art world. He would go here, she would go here. What you're looking at is actually one of O'Keeffe's rare cityscapes that she painted. This is called the Radiator Building. She would head off to New York and she would begin a long career and personal relationship with Stieglitz. Now I'm never really sure what to say about this relationship. I always find this particular photograph of the two of them somehow deeply telling about the nature of their relationship. For O'Keeffe, I'm not sure if it was a curse or a blessing that Stieglitz took such interest in her and her work. It was when she went to New York and with Stieglitz's guidance that, yeah, the flowers became important to her. She would paint these images, and she would paint them, she said, primarily because nobody sees a flower. It's so small. We haven't time to see, and to see takes time. Like to have a friend takes time. She didn't choose the flowers naively, nor did she choose the method which she kind of framed her images. She was very much playing with the relationship between painting and photography, about how we could blow things up, about how we could focus in on things, something that no doubt she also learned much about from Stieglitz, who was a photographer and promoted many famous American photographers in and through his galleries. She painted these flowers because, well, again, nobody took time to look at them. And she also famously once said that they also didn't cost as much as a model for her to use. And when she painted them, one of the things that oftentimes gets overlooked is she painted them on this big scale. She painted these enormous flower paintings because she said that way you couldn't ignore their beauty. I'll paint big and they'll be surprised taking a look at it, taking time, I'm sorry, to look at it. That's what she was onto and what she was up to. These were the kinds of images she made when she first went to New York, but every summer from the time she met Stieglitz onwards, they would go to Lake George and she would go back to her great love of landscape painting. She would go back to painting images like this one. This is her shanty from 1922 from a visit to Lake George. She would paint the trees in the area. Again, this is an interesting one because it's a watercolor, which by this time in O'Keeffe's career, she had pretty much abandoned. Stieglitz, when she first goes to New York, tells her that watercolors are for amateur lady painters, and so she should give up the watercolors and work only in oils. She would, at Lake George, nonetheless, pick those watercolors up again, and I sort of love these trees and the way they bend and twirl, and something I think you could only do with watercolor, much less easy to accomplish with oils. She'd also paint this work, which is one of my favorite of O'Keeffe's paintings. This is the Lawrence tree, and what she said of this work is that she often lay on the bench looking up into the tree, past the trunk, and up into the branches. It was particularly fine at night with stars about the tree. What a beautiful painting. And again, turning to the natural elements, away from New York City, away from always the flowers, and did I mention more flowers, which there was a huge audience for and which sold incredibly well. Yeah, she would go to Lake George and she would paint the landscape, she'd paint the trees, and she would paint the water. Here's just another one of the stunning images from the 1920s that she created. Such a beautiful landscape with that reflection going on in the water. And she would never really give up on her great love of abstraction. About the same time as she created this image, she also created this painting, which is called From the Lake. She was always exploring the natural world, always exploring the landscape, not only somehow realistically, but abstractly, with shape and with color and with form. Yeah, she loved the landscape. She loved being in Lake George. And we know a lot about her time there. We know a lot about what she was thinking, in part because she wrote her autobiography, and in part because we have at least now the first part of her letters with Stieglitz, which they sometimes wrote 4 times a day, that detail their artistic projects, that detail their families, their life together, in intense, the everyday details of a life lived. So we know how much she loved being in Lake George, and we also know how hard it was for her to return back to New York City after the summers. These are 3 of her paintings of cityscapes of New York. She was never really happy with them. She didn't think that she could really do cityscapes particularly well. She said you had to not see New York, you had to feel New York, and she just never thought she got it quite right. I sometimes wonder about that, her unhappiness with her paintings of New York City, and wonder if perhaps they reflect also her real unhappiness with her life there. She had a complicated life in New York City, very much part of a social scene she didn't feel entirely comfortable with, dealing with a tumultuous relationship with Stieglitz, struggling with depression. While she was there, she read in a magazine, Nature magazine, a piece that was done by Arthur Pack. He was the editor of that magazine. And in it, he talked about the unique beauty of the Piedra Lumbra. Sorry, I have to always look down to get the names correctly. And I apologize if my pronunciation is not quite right. This was an area in New Mexico that Pack really had learned to love. The Piedra Lumbra, it's Spanish for the shining light. And she read this and it kind of intrigued her, and she had kind of kept it in the back of her mind. And when her friend and fellow artist, Rebecca Strand, suggested that they go on a trip, that she leave New York and the controversy and the drama of her time there and take a trip to New York City, she was all ready to go. Where they headed was here, to Taos. And in Taos, they would stay with this person. This is Mabel Dodge Lewin. She owned an incredible home there, and she offered both Strand and O'Keeffe studios. And I have to say, for O'Keeffe, that was it. Whatever it was that she found there, she found, her place. We get a clear sense of that from what she looks like. It's so interesting. I find so few images of her smiling in New York City, and so many of her smiling when she was in New Mexico. Yeah, this was her place. What she said was that when I got to New Mexico, that was mine. As soon as I saw it, that was my country. I'd never seen anything like it before, but it fitted to me exactly. It's something that's in the air. It's different. The sky is different. The wind is different. She would spend time in this area, and she would spend time exploring it. This is the photo I showed you earlier from close to a BQ. It had this kind of stunning light that was there, and these amazing outcroppings, huge rock formations. And eventually, spending time in the area, she would find this place. She would find Ghost Ranch. Now, Ghost Ranch is 21,000 acres, or 85 kilometers square, in the shadow of the Cedar Canal Mountains. It is a stunning location, and I highly recommend. I know some of you've probably been here, and if you have memories or comments about this area, things you'd like to share, please use the chat on your screen. Love hearing your stories. Love hearing your reflections on time that's spent here. Such a beautiful area. In 1976, it became a national landmark and is now a protected area. What she found there, I thought, that was so inspiring. It, well, had something to do with the sky. And when it comes to looking at her landscapes, never fail to take a look at what she does with the sky. I think we focus oftentimes on the landforms and we miss something special about that sky. Well, it was an amazing place for her. And what she would do is she would look outside her window. Now, I have to tell you, these photos that we're taking a look at right now are from an amazing article and photo essay done in Architectural Digest. And we'll put the link up online so that you can have a chance to read more about this location and the house itself that was built there. What she would do is she would look outside her window and then she would paint what she saw. What was it that was so special that gave her the kind of courage to paint this way in this place? What was it that drew her over and over again to New Mexico? After her first visit, she would then, from then on, spend time back and forth in New York City and here at Ghost Ranch. She said that, well, she thought when she got there, it was all so far away. There was quiet and an untouched feel to the country, and I could work as I pleased. I think that notion of being away from everybody looking and judging, I think the idea of it being quiet, I think those really were the things that appealed to her, that it gave her the confidence and the space to be able to look for herself at the world around her, to look out that window and keep on looking, knowing that there was something there that she needed to capture. Oh yeah, she would go into this and she would do just as she pleased, which included things like this. Yeah, I noticed the smile. Yes, a Georgia O'Keeffe photograph with this great smile as she lifts bones of dead animals. Yeah, okay, so the bones were of great fascination to her. She would go out and collect them in the desert around Ghost Ranch. She would collect them here in her home, and then she would paint them. There was something about the bones that totally fascinated her. This is a cow skull, red, white, and blue. Very interesting that we see images of both the cross, which was also very important for her time in New Mexico. She said that they found crosses everywhere, and her deep belief in the American people and the American nation all get kind of combined here with a skull. And so interesting, notice the skull that's cracked down the middle. She painted this work. This is actually one of my favorite O'Keeffe paintings, called The Faraway Nearby. The title actually comes from the way she signed her letters. When she moved to New Mexico full-time, she would sign The Faraway Nearby, Georgia. But reflecting on this work in particular, she gave us a bit of a clue or some cues about why it was or what it was about the bones that so fascinated her. She said the bones seem to cut sharply to the center of something that is keenly alive on the desert, even though it's vast and empty and untouchable and knows no kindness with all its beauty. I've spent so much time thinking about this quote about the bones because there seems to be so many contradictions in what she was saying, and yet at the same time, I guess I kind of understand what she's saying. There is this unique kind of beauty in the desert. Look at that background, look at the sky, right? It's not easily approachable. Earlier on, I showed you that beautiful painting of Algonquin Park with all the trees and the water and the clouds in the sky, that painting by Tom Thompson. The desert is different in kind. We almost have to shift our vision. We have to shift our understanding of what beauty is perhaps that's what its great advantage is. Being in the desert, you have to actually put aside all your preconceived ideas of what a beautiful landscape looks like and look afresh and look again. Yeah, there's a unique kind of beauty here. And she says that knows no kindness, the harshness of it. Even more perplexing, though, to me about this quote is her belief that the bones cut sharply to the center of something keenly alive on the desert, though it's vast and empty and untouchable. The bones reach back to, the bones identify, the bones are connected to something that's alive in the desert. I am perplexed by, as I said, this kind of contradiction that the dead bones point towards something alive in a desert. I would be keen to know what you think she's getting at there, or what you think of this quote and its relationship to her bone paintings in particular. Yeah, she painted bones, and more bones. One of her most beautiful paintings in this regard, Ram's Head with Hollyhocks from 1935. Interestingly, even as she was painting bones, notice that flowers still make their appearance. They didn't entirely disappear from even her later works. Here we have another work that she painted, another landscape with, oh yeah, there you go. We've got a flower in the middle of it. She would turn from painting bones, though, to painting rocks as well. Again, some of the photos, and we have amazing photos taken by some of the world's great photographers, Ansel Adams. The name of the second one has left me. Karsh took very famous photographs of O'Keeffe. Stieglitz, throughout their relationships, took often controversial photos of O'Keeffe. This one in particular, though, I love because look at those eyes and look at, you know what I wish? This is what I wish. I wish I could know what she was seeing. You know, I wish I could see through her eyes. What did she see in the rocks and in the stones? You know, it's another one of those pictures of her looking out and looking at. And, you know, what was she looking for? What did she see there? She would study them here after she collected them as she walked in the desert. She would collect them and she would spend time drawing and writing about what she saw. And then she would come back and she would paint. She would paint in ways and landscapes, focusing on the forms and the shapes as we see here, undertaking this kind of remarkable study of light as well. Notice the red under a different light becomes this kind of black and beige and gray kind of study that we have. She would paint and paint again the mountains around her. Different colors, different studies in light. This it was one of her personal favorites. These paintings, all these paintings of the Paternal Mountains, she found kept particularly close to her heart. She actually wrote at one point in time that this is my private mountain. It belongs to me. God told me if I painted it enough, I could have it. She painted it and she painted it and she painted it because there was something there that captivated her, something that kept her looking, kept her working, kept her coming back. She would paint and paint what she saw out those windows in these hills. And it began to be a real study. I particularly like this work, which is of her backyard, because it's such a wonderful study of what she did with light. You know, I mentioned before the focus on the flowers and sometimes on the bone take us away from some of the other painterly elements of what she did, but the studies in color, and the studies, more importantly, of shifts and changes in form and shape as a result of shifts in light, are just phenomenal in her work. And she knew it. She worked hard towards trying to somehow capture the light here. She said this of it: it is not a country of light on things, it is a country of things in light. And I think that that so well captures her project in this kind of landscape. She went to New Mexico, as I mentioned before, and she fell in love with this landscape. She painted it over and over and over again. And from her time of her first visit, about 1929, she would spend part of her year there every year. Oh yeah, she would go back to New York City, and she would do what she needed to do in terms of her business and in terms of her friends and her family life. But yeah, New Mexico stuck with her. She would also travel. She would travel, for example, here's her in, of all places, Hawaii. Recently, we had a catalog come out of her Hawaii paintings. A lot of people don't know that she did go to Hawaii, and she went because in 1939, the Hawaiian Pineapple Company, which became Dole, they had commissioned a number of artists, well-known artists, to do images of pineapples for them. And O'Keeffe was chosen. And you know, her great love of landscape, she said, hey, let's go. And so off she goes. And she spends time in Hawaii. And I know, I can hear you, even though you're not close right now. I can hear looking at this painting. If you're a lover of O'Keeffe's work, it is a stunner of a painting that she does of the Hawaiian landscape. She spends time painting the landscape there. She spends time painting a lot of the flora in Hawaii. Here she is again, really doing kind of studies in the different forms and styles. Yeah, I know, more flowers. I just can't escape them. But she did spend time as well doing, landscapes while she was in Hawaii. You saw just a minute ago this image. This is the image she did for Dole. So she spends all this time in Hawaii and she's so inspired and she does all these landscape paintings. And then she comes back and realizes, oh yeah, I think I was supposed to paint a pineapple. It was supposed to be the reason why I got the commission and why they sent me there. And apparently Dole Company had to send to her apartment in New York a pineapple so that she could create this work, which was used for an advertisement. By the way, Dole also wasn't very pleased. It wasn't the kind of pineapple they were expecting Georgia to paint. But her love of landscape, even when she traveled away, she's always looking out at the rocks and the forms, at the water, and at the natural world that's around her. But as I said, you know, she would always come back to New Mexico. She would always come back to this place. Indeed, in 1946, Stieglitz will die. She'll spend a couple of years trying to settle his business affairs, but then in 1949, she would move to New Mexico and live there full time. And she would create these amazing works. Another one of my favorite of her landscape. It's a great thing, being able to do these nature walks, these walks through the desert today with you via O'Keeffe's paintings, because I get to pick and be inspired all over again by some works that has just kind of captured my imagination and captured my understanding of landscape in particular, and of this landscape in New Mexico. Of landscape, I should apologize, of landscape in general, and of the New Mexico landscape in particular. Yeah, she was doing something, and she knew that she was doing something different, something that was daring. She said of these later works, I've been absolutely terrified every moment of my life, and I've never let it keep me from doing a single thing I wanted to. That kind of boldness to be able to paint the way she did, to paint works that look like this one. Works that were these amazing studies. Again, notice the idea of light. Notice in the background, we have the light much brighter. Notice the shadows and notice the shifting and changing colors that we have here. Indeed, she said that of all the earth colors of the, of all the earth colors of the painter's palette, there are out there in the miles of Badlands. And what a great work to make that clear. Yeah, towards the end of her life, it was all about the landscapes. It was all about the place where she was. It was all about Ghost Ranch and the area around it. And she would return, and we see it already in this work, she would return back to her great love of and her appreciation of, her real belief in the power of abstraction. You remember we saw this work early on, one of her watercolors from that period before Stieglitz, when she was really experimenting with color and with form. Well, she would pick this back up again, and she would create works that started to look like this. You know, she was always trying to work with landscape and how do we capture it in its abstract form. I mentioned earlier her study of light and also her study of color, the great red rust hills that we saw with that palette of colors. And here you see the notion of motion, of how she sees the landscape always in motion. Yeah, what she was doing was unlike anything anybody else was doing at the time. It really her own signature work, her great originality, I think, comes not with the flowers, but with her landscapes. During this time period, towards the end of her life, she would return to this notion of abstraction. Here she is out in the desert. There you see the mountains in the background, painting away. And notice the painting, this real return to abstract shapes and colors to kind of try to capture something that was there in the landscape that she seems to have always been trying to capture, always coming close to, but not quite getting there. So she'd pick up a new canvas, a new palette, a new set of colors. She'd take on a new project and try again. She'd continue to work in increasingly abstract manners towards the end of her painting career. Here we have her Black Door with Red from 1954. She went through a whole period in the 50s where she went to geometric figures to try to explore what she could see, how she could communicate what she saw using geometrics. I have to say, not my favorite part of her work, but I think it was a necessary moment in her own development, in creating her own confidence to use more organic sort of images, ones that look like this. Here is blue and green, this late work of hers. And I just think that she's set free to just give us what it was she saw, maybe what it was she felt as she looked at the landscape. All this motion, all this light, and all this color. She would paint images like this. She would also, towards the end of her career, paint these sorts of landscapes, or perhaps more accurately, skyscrapes. She had seen the countryside from a plane, and she did a whole series of images to try to show the land, not from being on the ground, not from the things that had died there, but to see it from above. And how interesting that is, eh? Just the different perspectives that she's looked at this landscape from the dirt and the dust and the bones to the mountains, from the present and the clear, then from up above. Probably my favorite of her later works is this one, The Sky Above the Clouds, #3. And again, one of the things that I'm always frustrated with when we do these webinars is, I try to find the best quality images I can to help us get a sense of the place and the space. And to help us get a sense of the paintings, but this is a copy of a copy of a copy. And if you can, what you want to do is try to see Sky Above Clouds in person, because it is a stunning look. And if you've flown above the land, it will make so much sense to you. Well, early on, right at the beginning, I told you that my interest with O'Keeffe and her landscapes is in what she was seeing, What did she see when she looked out the door into this kind of landscape? What did she see when she looked out her window? What was she looking for in that landscape? And you may notice as we've walked through the deserts, as we've gone over the mountains, as we've looked at this place from above with her, I've been a wuss. I've been a weasel, because I haven't really answered the question, why this pull towards painting landscapes? What was she seeing? What was she trying to capture? I spent a lot of time reading the commentators on this question, and there's many and various ways of trying to cash out what she was doing, what the call of the landscape was. A brilliant book called Georgia O'Keeffe and New Mexico. We'll include it on the handout that we'll send to you. A fairly new book. One of the arguments made there was that she needed a sense, well, the book's subtitle is A Sense of Place, that, she was trying to make a place hers, to make it her own. That there was a sense of belonging that comes with painting the landscape. It's an interesting and well-argued hypothesis, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure what it is that she was getting at. I was thinking earlier today about, of all people, Goya, because Goya, in creating many of his images, history paintings more than landscapes, he talks about creating the cartography of the inner self. And I was thinking about whether that's what O'Keeffe is up to here, whether the more she went out into the world and the more she explored out there, the more space she experienced on the outside, the more space she had on the inside. The more we go out, the more she went in. And that gave her the daring to be able to create works and landscapes like nobody else had seen. I think there's more to think about on that issue. I'd be really interested to hear your comments on what is the call of landscape? What was it for her in particular? Those are a couple of my best guesses at the moment as I try to take up my own questions. I, for so long, have been a teacher who asks questions. When I'm asked to answer them, sometimes I find myself struggling and thinking it's not quite right and it's not what I should be doing. Just to continue this thought and to continue this idea of what she was up to, I did want to show you this work, because people found something in what she was painting and what she was creating. This is Jimson Weave, and it is at the moment particularly well known for folks because it, and I apologize for looking downward, I have lost my sheet to tell you what the actual price was. This is the most expensive painting by a female artist that was ever sold. It's about 3 times more than the next closest female artist. Clearly, people were finding something in her work, something more than just the flower, something that it was reaching out to. I love this image because she sort of seems to be challenging us to think about what she was doing and how she was creating. And well, go back to that question I started with, or that quote from her I started with. She said, "Where I was born and where and how I lived is unimportant. It's what I've done with where I've gone that should be of interest to you." And that's what I'm hoping you'll try to pick up as you continue to walk with her through her deserts. one last quote, because I can't quite resist ever. She said that whether you succeed or not is irrelevant. There's no such thing, but making your unknown known is the important thing, and keeping the unknown always beyond you. That somehow that seems to be what she's doing in and through these paintings. There was something unknown, and rather than pushing it away, she kept it just beyond her, and it kept her painting, and it kept her trying, and it kept her innovating. Yep, I mentioned I have had Georgia on my mind and in my head, and she has been messing with my notions of landscape and with what great artists do. And I can't help but thank you all for joining me as I've gone on this walk through her desert in her paintings. Thanks.
Wendy, let me just put my camera back here. That was while I get myself set up and get the questions going. That was incredible. I saw so many paintings of hers that I wasn't familiar with, and I hope that it was the same experience for all of you watching here. And it brought back so many good personal memories. My late dad moved from the East Coast, where we're from, to Tucson several years ago, and I have an uncle who lives in Albuquerque. And so between those things, I've spent a lot of time in the American West. And yeah, the light and the desert landscapes and all the different kinds of deserts that are so alive, and they seem so still and so unmoving, but they're so alive. It was just fascinating. So let's get to the questions. We have a lot of great questions, a couple more complicated ones. So I think I'll start with a couple more straightforward ones, and then bring in some of the multi-part ones. Let's see here. Okay. A question from Seth, who asks if Georgia O'Keeffe knew Agnes Martin.
I can't really tell you that for certain. I imagine they would have, because she was so connected with all, painters coming in and through, and mostly painters selling in New York at the time. And clearly they both had a great affinity for this part of the world, a great affinity towards landscape, though remarkably different ways of translating their love of the land. I would really like to know what inspires the question. If you see similarities in their works, or if it's the different sort of styles as they approach it. It would be great to know. It's one of the unfortunate parts of doing a webinar like this is I don't get a chance to do a follow-up question. But if you have a minute to quick type in the interest, I would love to know.
And I'll keep my eye out for that.
Thanks, Mel.
And just a comment from Leah about the Jimson Weave painting. And Wendy, I had to step out for a second, so maybe you covered this. Last auction, she says it's last auctioned in 1987 for $900,000. Her O'Keeffe's previous auction record was a 1928 painting that sold for $6.2 million. With its $44 million price tag, Jimson Weave is now the most expensive painting, as Wendy mentioned, by a woman artist ever sold. So just
and it's really interesting. Thank you, Leah, for helping with the answer. I got my pages mixed up. I hate when that happens.
It happens.
And in the midst of the heat, my New Mexico heat up here, it kind of got lost amongst things. But it's really interesting to wonder, like, what is it? Is it something about O'Keeffe? Is it because of her notoriety, her fame now, that's why she's eliciting these sorts of prices in the sale of her works? Is it something specific about that work? Is it about the flowers? Kind of fascinating to think about, why O'Keeffe, why now, and what is it that pulls buyers to her work? So thank you for the info.
This next question is related to auctions and buying of her painting, so I'll do this one next. This is from Julie, who asks about. She asks, "Are you aware of an O'Keeffe painting, The Big Morning Glory on a Green Background, that Crystal Bridges bought a couple of years ago?"
Mhm.
And I'm not sure from Julie's question, but I think she's saying Crystal is a Walmart heiress. She says a guard told me the Walmart heiress, who's been collecting American paintings for her museum over the years, took a lot of criticism for taking this portrait or this picture from the O'Keeffe Museum in Santa Fe, where it was, to bring it to another museum. And the buyer, the Walmart heiress, said it was a win-win situation.
Mm.
The New Mexico Museum got a lot of money from me, and Crystal Bridges has this important artist taking pride of place in one of my galleries. Julie asks, where do you come down on these kinds of acquisitions?
Thanks, Julie. This is a really, it is a messy question, and one that I have a feeling, and I hate to discourage people at the moment, if you believe that paintings belong in the public realm and should be on display. A couple of things. First, a bit of context. This selling of paintings by museums to private buyers or to other museums really, it sort of has hit its heyday because of the fact that painting is and artworks are one of the few commodities that tend not to go down in price. And so it's like a sure bet investment. And so, of course, today, more corporations now own some of the great works of art than do individual galleries. And I have to say something, I apologize because it's heartbreaking for me too, is that a lot of those corporations and companies, multinationals who've invested in painting, oftentimes they don't display the works, but rather they vault it. Displaying works by O'Keeffe, works even by Tom Thompson, that becomes an incredibly expensive venture when it comes to the issue of insurance. And so oftentimes bought because they're a safe investment, their value will only increase, they're then vaulted. The question of what should a painting be? Does it belong in the public realm? Thus comes an important question.
And sorry, Wendy, I also think, does it belong like in New Mexico as part of that as well? Anyway, Garcia, go ahead.
Oh yeah, exactly. And those are, regional issues become in play. And I think we're going to see more of these sorts of questions being raised about who buys and who should be able to buy paintings by great artists as people try to recover from the economic crisis of COVID. I think we're going to see a lot of galleries putting up works, some of their treasures, in order to get out of their present circumstances. I got to say, I would love the O'Keeffe Museum to have O'Keeffe's work. I would love for it to be possible for us to go and look at the place and look at the painting and talk about the relationship between painting a landscape and the landscape itself, what she captures, what she can't capture, what she was up to. But I think, unfortunately, the current reality is that we're going to see more and more of her works up for auction, especially because of the price that they're going for. So, sorry, I hate to be a downer, but I don't remain particularly optimistic about what's going to happen in the near future as we try to recover from the present economic crisis.
Yeah, especially for small museums. I mean, even large museums are starting to sell. So a small museum like the Santa Fe Museum, which I've been to several times, and it's really wonderful, but it's very small.
Yeah,
compared to some other, larger museums. Go ahead,
it's
Wendy,
a tricky question, right? It's a really tricky question because we want those museums, and at the same time, they have to be able to be financially viable. So sometimes they have to sell works. Interesting, when I was looking at the cost of the price that Jimson Weave went for, just noticing over the last couple of years, the number of O'Keeffe's works that have been at auction at Christie's has been kind of fascinating to kind of keep track of. clearly there's a market for her work. Clearly people are divesting in order to maintain some kind of financial viability.
Thanks, Wendy, for that. Julie adds just another complicating factor that the crystal bridge is free. So does that making the painting more available to people in a way? So many complexities there.
Yeah, and the art world kind of has its own kind of logic and workings. And as much as we want to talk about the lines and the colors and the composition and the ideas and the techniques of the artist, artists need to eat. And artists and art galleries need to remain open and financially viable. We can't just focus on the art and leave the business element behind, as much as I wish we could.
Right, thank you, Wendy and Julie. A question from Sharon, and actually I have a related question. So you talked about Mabel Dodge. My quick question is that the same Mabel Dodge that was that Gertrude Stein wrote about in I think The Making of Americans? And then Sharon's question is, whoops, it just went away. Hold on. Oh no, Sharon had two questions. Okay, I'm on the wrong one. She asked, here it is. Do you know anything else about Georgia O'Keeffe's relationship with Mabel Dodge Lewin, who is herself a character and was a magnet for other artists, including D.H. Lawrence?
Yeah, you know what? We need a good biography. And I, in my search over the last few days, couldn't find a good source about Mabel Dodge Lewin. And if I got aspiring art historian, or I think even better, a great novel to be written, she is such an important character in American art and her support for it. And the people who went through her home, the people she gave studios for, check online and look for photos of her as well, because there's all these people who came in and through, and they have these great photographs of her. And so, yeah, I do believe that is the same person that Gertrude Stein writes of. And she was this huge advocate of the arts and just providing people with places and spaces to do their work. I think it's, I don't think Georgia O'Keeffe would be Georgia O'Keeffe if it wouldn't have been for the fact that, she opened up to her and to Rebecca Strand, studios to allow them to work away from New York City. If O'Keeffe would have stayed in New York, I often kind of play this game in my head. What if she would have stayed? What would she have painted? Wouldn't she have painted? I'm not sure she could have allowed her brilliance to shine amidst the society and the art world of New York. So yeah, it is that Mabel Dodge Lewin. And please, somebody write a book. We need a book about her and her incredible influence on the art world and beyond.
I'll include a link about her in the follow-up, and just a couple people have questions about that. We do send a recording, and there'll be links to some further resources, including Ghost Ranch. A couple people are asking about Ghost Ranch and if you can stay there. Yes, you can.
Yes, you can. It's an education and a meditation center. They run all kinds of courses. You can check it out online. And yeah, please go. Even checking out their website. They have done these fabulous videos to give you a sense of the landscape. So do be sure to visit them, and hopefully after we visit them online and visit this area through Georgia O'Keeffe's paintings, hopefully the day will come and we'll be able to visit in person once again.
Yes. A question from Brian, who asks, or says, some of the works that you showed, like the Red Rust Hills, look almost like textile art. Did Georgia O'Keeffe do any work with textiles?
Not that I know of, Brian. Though there's all this kind of, a question about her relationship with some of the First Nations people who were working in this area, some of her knowledge of that. As far as I know, she didn't do textiles, though she did have a lot of amazing objects. She loved the feel of things. We saw those pictures of the stones, we saw the bones. her house was filled with exquisite things that seemed to inspire her. You know what, I have to say, when you said textiles, you're right, like the colors and the layer of the painting and the brushstroke she uses, it does indeed look like almost seams and stitching that we're taking a look at. As far as I know, though, she didn't work in things beyond paint.
Oh, but there was a question about her sculpture. And sorry, Wendy, like I said, I had to step out for a second, so I might have missed this. Somebody asked a question about any sculptures that she did. So I don't know if you had covered, did you mention, it sounds like you mentioned sculpture, or I might have misunderstood the question.
I didn't talk about sculpture.
Okay, so let me just go. Yeah,
Yeah,
so yeah, go ahead. Keep going, Wendy. Keep going.
yeah. I have to tell you, my focus has always been on her painting. I know there's images of her with sculptures. I couldn't tell you which were hers and which weren't. So yeah, sorry, we've hit a point beyond my immediate knowledge, but I'm always willing to do some research to find out. I find there's, like, along with like the texture element, there are definitely, especially this image that we're taking a look at, I have it up because it's one of my favorite, but also the Red Mountains ones that we saw earlier, where it seems to be so close to sculpture. We know that, you know, she was photographed a lot. We know that she did the paintings, but to be honest, I'm not sure about any sculpting that she did.
Yeah, if you do want to include a follow-up link, Wendy, just let me know and we'll put that in. Angela has a couple of questions about the reception of her work and her influences. Did she have other artists who influenced her or inspired her? And what kind of reception did her work get in the art world of the time in New York City?
Great questions. In terms of influence, I think you can't underestimate, and again, I think more work needs to be done in looking at the fullness of her career. But she was really trained as in the very traditional kind of model and very traditional methods of painting. She had a really great knowledge of art history, for example, that I think sometimes gets a bit lost. There's another New York female painter, Florine Stettheimer, who I'm very interested in, and she and O'Keeffe were friends, and I've been tracking down some of their correspondence and, you know, their commentary on historic figures as well as figures in New York at the time, and their knowledge of each other's work is always impressive to me. So yeah, we tend to think that pops out of nowhere and does something nobody did, but that's not true. She had a really good knowledge, for example, of still life traditions. We saw that early work that she won the award for, the dead rat. Yeah, I know, the dead rabbit. The dead rabbit painting, that comes from a really careful study of still life and of the techniques used by the great masters for it, a long study of the notion of vanitas, a special kind of still life that's associated with things that are dead to give us to think about our mortality. So she clearly had a really good knowledge of art history from her education. She was also, because of her relationship with Stieglitz, they were part of the, of the serious art world folks. They went to a lot of events. They saw a lot of artwork. They knew folks. She wrote a lot of letters. She knew Frida Kahlo, for example. I mentioned Florine Stettheimer. She had a long relationship with Rebecca Strand. So, you know, to take her away and think that she wasn't aware of these other things that are happening would be wrong. What I find fascinating about her is that she knew all about what other people were doing. She knew the tradition. She knew what was the style or the taste of the day, and she did something altogether different and unique and original. And I go back to that, quote from early on in my presentation today from one of her letters, where she says, it takes courage to show your world in any kind of art form. In terms of her reception for her work, when she first came to New York, I mentioned that Stieglitz showed her right away. Those charcoal drawings fascinated him. He put on a show of her work early on, and his gallery was the who's who of the art world came to buy from him there. So she was like dropped right into the middle of a kind of world that she probably couldn't have imagined existed before she came to New York, which was in South Carolina. On top of that, Stieglitz, emphasis on her flower paintings, which she had started to do, as I said, because it was kind of economical. He showed them and they sold immediately and they sold well. And he really did encourage her to just keep on doing flowers. And she just kind of resisted. She had other things that she was interested in doing. So the market was there for her work right from the beginning. Now, why the flowers? Lots of questions about whether it was easier for people to accept the flower paintings, put them on the walls, have them reproduced right from the beginning, where some of the landscapes are perhaps a little less appealing in that same sort of way, harder to kind of integrate into our understanding. So yeah, she did well. And the other thing that she had going for her is, again, because of Stieglitz, she knew the art world as a business. Interesting talking about the sale of her paintings, but she knew it from that perspective. She saw it up close in person as he ran his galleries, and so she was always aware of the value of her work and the value of things. So yeah, really, really knowledgeable about it. And yeah, right from the start, her works were sold.
Thank you, Wendy. And there was a follow-up from Seth, kind of relates to what you were just saying about Agnes Martin. Yes, that they both lived in New Mexico, and he says their work does seem to have a similar feel with the colors, and it seems they each had their own way of creating their visions of the world.
Absolutely. You know what? The two amazing original artists. And there's so much. And I have to say, when you asked the question, Seth, and thank you for it, all of a sudden my mind went tick, 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 thinking about so many of the similarities. Because I mentioned earlier, O'Keeffe struggled with depression, as did Agnes Martin. Both of them fought and succeeded with that struggle and created remarkable works. Not out of it, but and through their struggle with mental illness. I see, again, as you mentioned, so many of the colors and just this desire to be original, this real push to be original. There's a great new documentary. I have to tell you, if you're a big fan of Agnes Martin and want to see some of her work to see how it might be in conversation with O'Keeffe's, there's a great new documentary that came out that I think we are able to access. I know in Canada we can access it for free. I'll make sure that those in the US, I'll do some hunting to see if I can find you a link as well, because I think that'll really help to see these two women in comparison. I have to say, on O'Keeffe, I haven't found a great documentary. There was a movie made a few years ago about O'Keeffe and Stieglitz, but I'm waiting for somebody, as well as writing a great novel or a biography of Mabel Dodge, also somebody to do a great documentary on O'Keeffe. I think it's well timed.
We also have a lot of comments about just people commenting about the New Mexico landscape and other things. So I'll include more of these in the follow-up, but I'll share a couple here. From Janice, who says, Wendy, I love that you are encouraging us to make our own associations to O'Keeffe's paintings. Her paintings of the bones suggest to me genealogy and what these bone parents created and may have passed on to future generations like herself.
Oh, what an interesting insight. And as I was talking and looking, one of the things that I try to do is I try to think with you as we look at this. I have my notes and my research, and then I try to think with you, and that's why sometimes I get lost in the notes. But it really was these different ways that she was looking at the desert and at the landscape. And I think this notion of genealogy, looking in the bones are from the bottom up, whereas those later paintings are from the top down. And what a great insight. Thank you for that. I'm going to put that in my head and be thinking about it. Thank you.
And we have several recommendations for bios and exhibits here. So I'll put all of these, everybody, in the follow-up. So thank everyone that's sharing all this information. Thank you.
This is one of my favorites. I'm trying to, I can't see me on the screen. So I'm hoping,
Yeah,
are we,
move it closer a little bit again.
Georgia O'Keeffe in New Mexico, a great set of essays as well as wonderful reproductions of her work. And we'll be sure to include that. Yeah, and the other thing I have to say, if you're looking for something to read during these hot summer days, as many of us are dealing with the heat wave, I know this is going to scare people because it's very thick, but this is the first part of the letters, the edited letters between Stieglitz and O'Keeffe. And if you love O'Keeffe, it's so wonderful to have a chance to read her own words, and so much about not just their relationship, but so much about the art. They're so inspirational.
And actually, that's a good follow-on. So we have time for just a few more questions. Several people are commenting. I have a question here from, or a comment, I think, from, from Mary Lou and several others about just the feeling that New Mexico, in general, Ghost Ranch in particular, are very holy and spiritual places. And Sharon asks, do you know about the role of religion in her painting? She has some remarkably powerful paintings of crosses in the desert.
Yeah, thank you for those questions. And you know, making your unknown known, that quote that I read earlier, it seems to have almost this kind of the word spiritual element to it. You know what? I don't think that she was religious in her orientation. And she said of her crosses, if you've been in New Mexico, when she was there, I would imagine in the 40s forward, she started going there in 1929 and then would go pretty much every year thereafter. They were just part of the landscape. I'm not sure that she had a particular religious orientation. Now, having said that, I think there's a deep spirituality in her work. And I'm going to divide up the religious, the traditional, or the institutional notion of religion from a kind of spirituality, because I so agree with you about both the place, but particularly her paintings. And this idea, that picture of her looking out the window, you know, what are you seeing? What are you looking for there? And it always does seem to be something, you know, something bigger and better that's pulling her in the landscape. And so we don't have any real link to religion for her, to organized religion. But is there a spirituality that seems to persist? Yeah, I think there is. And I think she'd probably hate me saying that. I have that worry all the time. You saw that, some of those photos of her, with her looking very skeptical at the camera. And every time I say, yeah, I think there's a spirituality, I have that one particular image I had towards the end of my presentation with her sitting there doing this. I'm sure she's going, hooey fooey. I paint flowers and rocks and trees, and that's perhaps there's a kind of naturalism, you know, a return to more the naturalism as a form of spiritualism that I think we also saw for those of you who were with me last week. I got lots of comments, people asking me similar questions about Tom Thompson and his religious orientations, which we don't know anything about, but they seem to haunt almost the paintings. Just a little preview, but if you're here with me next week as we look at Emily Carr's work, we've gone north, we went south today. Next week, we're going west to the west coast of Canada, to British Columbia, and to the ancient rainforest there with Emily Carr. She will directly speak to the spiritual element in paintings. And we'll be taking a look at some of the things. We have her amazing journals from the time that she spent painting there later in her life, in her 50s, which makes clear to us, that she was seeing a spiritual element. She thought that all great painting has a spiritual element, whether or not the painter themselves recognizes it. So thank you for that question. And stay tuned, because
sorry, go ahead. Did Emily Carr and Georgia know each other?
Good question. Emily Carr and Georgia O'Keeffe, it's always hard for me. Yes, they did know of each other's work. And O'Keeffe knew about Frida Kahlo's work, though Kahlo didn't know O'Carr. So the three of them, these three amazing landscape painters, and yes, I consider Frida Kahlo also a landscape painter, working very different ways of understanding line and color and composition, but all trying to capture the landscape. So yeah, and I'll do a little lead in about O'Keeffe to Carr next week.
Okay, I'll leave it with one more comment that I think is really a really nice place to end on. Before I do that, just a couple of people are asking about where most of our paintings are kept and where you can see them. So we will include links. I know there's the Keefe Museum, Wendy, and the Whitney. Any other places that off the top of your head where would have a big selection of her work?
Those are the two that came to me right off, but we can do a little bit of hunting. Look for exhibitions of her work as well, and we had a great one here in Toronto not all that long ago. That was incredibly successful. So keep an eye out. But yeah, we'll do some links. The George O'Keeffe Museum. People tend to have one or two O'Keeffes if they have one. We have one at the art gallery in our permanent collection. It's an eggplant. It's not my favorite O'Keeffe, but we have one. So I'm always grateful that we have a place to start. So look for them. She was so, also, she was just painted so much. And I didn't have any questions. I was hoping people would ask about the watercolors, but those watercolors have been pretty much forgotten. So there are so many of her works she painted for so long. She lived till she was 98. She stopped painting when she was about 72. She had a degenerative eye disease that meant that she couldn't paint without assistance. But she left us with such an amazing body of painting, of artwork for us to consider that, keep your eye out, and we'll find some links for you. Thank you.
Yeah, those watercolors, Wendy, I didn't know most of those. They're incredible. Amazing.
Yeah, and all from the 1914, 15, 16. And she liked working in watercolors. It wasn't only that she liked something about the way that the paint actually moved and the colors, but she liked it. It was also cheap when she was struggling. And yeah, Stieglitz told her as soon as she went to New York, no more watercolors, because it made her an amateur. I kind of wish she would have stuck with it, because what she could do with a watercolor was pretty amazing.
All right, well, we'll leave it with this quote from Vonda, and I hope you all come back next week as well for Emily Carr. So let me read Vonda's quote. It strikes me that the lack of structure in the landscape freed George's mind, body, and spirit to the surface without expectation or judgment. She could be all of herself without anyone looking on or providing commentary.
Mm-hmm. What a great quote. And yeah, and what a great artist. Thank you, everybody, for joining me on this walk through the Badlands and through the deserts in New Mexico. It has been a delight. Thank you, Melanie.
Thank you, Wendy. As always, so much fun, so joyous, and so much to learn and absorb. Thank you, everyone. I will put some of your comments in the follow-up, because there are many great comments here about this landscape. And please come back next week. And if you do want to take Wendy's seminar about encounters with landscape, there are just 2 places left. So snap those up before they go. You can find them on the Classical Pursuits website.
Yeah,
Thanks,
I'm
Wendy.
really looking forward